Keep running with this. So, because I broached the subject, I'm going to continue with what I was saying about my experience around the time of the George Floyd slayings. But that's not the overarching message, but it's still part of the message of the current series and the last several videos leading into this discussion. But what I want to say is that at the time that George Floyd was slain, and in the time of the COVID-19 pandemic, um, for at least um, for at least 4 years before that, I had been around things that you could see in movies, and then um, and I had experienced from that and with that over like a phase of life, like a saga, in something you could appreciate it as a form of a war crime, actual war crime. Sometimes you don't know that you're actually in war, and war goes on along right next to living. So like you take some of your a lot of your fighting different movies you see about war, they'll show civilians in that movie, like about like you imagine like Saving Private Ryan, you see civilians in there, or you see the movie by Spike Lee where he did another World War II movie like that but in Italy, and you see civilians right next to soldiers. I think there's a word for that when soldiers. I think it's like commandeer or marshal, or like when you have to put a soldier in your home because your home is actually your home as a civilian in a war zone is actually it's actually a tactical advantage as capital in a military application. Your actual life, your possessions, and your actual dwelling could could neatly, eccentrically, spontaneously factor into a battlefield advantage for soldiers or for someone commanding soldiers. There's a word for what that is. I don't know what that word is offhand, but such just goes to show that living lifestyle civilians, some of the favor, some of the privileges and strong suits of being a civilian outside of the rigors and the duties of a military lifestyle, a martial lifestyle in activities, but also the privacy and the autonomy of not being targeted or beholden to military interests and detriments is what a civilian experiences right next to an actual soldier or military uh, um, company of some kind that does have those duties and rigors and are targeted as such. But either the civilian and or the military combatant participant, as they have chosen to be or been conscripted to be, either can still suffer and become a casualty. But sometimes war comes upon people, and you start to be in war before you chose to be or recognize that you were, whether you appreciated yourself as a civilian or not, or were appreciated as a civilian or not. And according to the YouTuber King Noble, in a time of war or maybe even in civil society, what someone that could potentially be a detriment to you thinks of you is more significant than what you think of yourself, and what you'll be engaged as and are for intensive purposes are. If you are appreciated as such, you are such, and as warfare and fighting is concerned. So prior to George Floyd being slain, I experienced things that could constitute war, and or crime, and or could be actually theatrically portrayed. But then while that was happening, I was appreciating myself as a civilian. I was not associated with or affiliated with a militant group having numbers, either that be state sanctioned or street sanctioned or de facto, for lack of a better word. I wasn't part of a street organization or a a state sanctioned organization, and my mother would not likely like my mother never wanted me around weapons in life, and even as I was potentially being targeted and victimized and in danger, she didn't want me brandishing and bearing weapons, and I might have actually fared better for not brandishing and bearing weapons. I told a friend once from my childhood when I was talking, me and him, we both grew up at the same. We're the same school age, and we grew up in the same. We were actually only about a month apart. Our birthdays less than a month apart, So we had a lot of the same experiences and influences growing up, and we can both remember in the '90s it was all about guns. We listened to a lot of music that portrayed violence, but you go into the '90s, it was all about movie stores for all people, all walks of life were about movie stores, and there a lot of things had a gun on it. But one time I appreciate it. If you look at a lot of movies, especially from the past, maybe now so more, when you have a movie and somebody lays their hand on a gun in a movie, not too long later they end up experiencing violence or being slain. I come to appreciate that in real life is that when certain things appear in your experience, in a beautiful sense would be an instrument. So if someone walks in your life or in a room and they have an instrument on them, that's significant that would appear in your experience, and that may forebode well and come back to redouble and amount to an instrument being in your hands before you recognize you're not. Oh, the same is true of a weapon appearing in your experience or in your vicinity, or you going so far as to purchase and own a weapon and bring it into your own dwelling of your own choice. It would influence and attend and be an indication of foreboding of potential outcomes for yourself and others, where you actually behave different, think different, being in the proximity or being comfort around weapons differently. So if you're at that time, I remember one time I was taking a ride. I was giving a ride to my mom's friend and her after work one day, and I'm a little bit. I appreciate myself as being present of mind because of how I view time. What's called time as a relative, a relative arbitrary and a training conditioning tool that's a part of going all the way back to industrialism and then potentially slavery and feudalism with that, and before that is what the clock is, in a conditioning tool, an effective conditioning tool. But sometimes I can perceive things as they're existing without a lot of people actually exist with a little bit of a lag between what's transpiring and what they appreciate as transpiring. You can perceive that sometimes. It's like sometimes you're like a car will pull out and people will keep driving at the car and not respond to it as it had uh, crossed their line of travel, because they're actually not present to the moment. That's an example of some of the fog of time, is that appreciating things as though they are linear makes things appear linear and exist somewhat linear to you with that lens, and it amounts to a little bit of a lag with what had transpired in your appreciation. Even as cognizant as I think I am and conscious as I am, if you were to swipe at a fly, that fly could respond to you faster than what you thought you responded. You swiped at that fly. Actually, what we're experiencing as time and space and activity does not actually exist the same rate that we perceive it as. That can be true enough if you take the influence of something. You take the influence of something, and damn it, things do move slower than you would normally appreciate. Time and space is now slower to your relative perception, but also to all the things that are influenced by your relative perception, which are also your reality. Now it is slower, or now it is faster, or now it is very stable, depending on different influences from a chemical level. But if you were to swipe at a fly, that fly is going to respond to you almost as quick as you could think of swiping at it, because it is experiencing what's called time, uh, deeper, finer than you. That is, I'm talking to me and my pretentious aspirations and fancies about time being relative. But so you can see that sometimes with drivers, is that drivers appreciate time and space differently and respond to vicissitudes and changes differently, appreciably differently. But uh, um, but but all I meant to say is that during that time of the George Floyd thing, I was not engaging with weapons, but I had some dangers. I had some very some horrible stuff on my hands that I didn't know how to handle as a civilian. So a couple times I looked for support because I had no other recourse, and there was some crazy stuff happening. So it's potential that the very same officers that slayed George Floyd in those years leading up to him being slayed, prior to up to 4 years, but also the same year he was slain, it's potential that they could hear some of what was transpiring in my life come over the radio when certain things happened in my life. So that's an example of the actual type of environment that George Floyd was slain in. What would have been the stale, flat, deadly undercurrent of the times of in place where he was slain. prior to that. I'm not saying that's a cause, but that would have been present, and that's part of the actual history and context of when he was